Imagine a version of Britain that's haunted by dead titans, where griffins rule the skies and cities are built on the ruins of forgotten civilizations. If that sounds like your cup of tea, then this duology is for you. Hey everyone, welcome to Vera Reads Books. Today I want to share with you a really fun and kind of underhyped fantasy duology that I recently read and really liked. It is the Talon Duology by Jen Williams. The first book is called Talonsister and the second book is called Titanchild. This is going to be a spoiler-free review of the book. I'm going to share with you a little teaser of the story, also talk about some of the book's strengths and weaknesses, the major themes of the book, and some content warnings as well. So basically whatever you need to know to decide for yourself if this is a duology that you want to pick up and read for yourself too. I really had a great time with these books, and I feel like they deserve a little bit more hype and deserve to be talked about a little bit more. I myself got the recommendation to read these two books from another booktuber called Elliot Brooks, and she made a review video of the first book, which I will leave in the description box in case anyone is interested. I had a lot of fun, so I am very excited to tell you about them. The Talon Duology is an adult epic fantasy with a blend of dark folklore and a touch of horror. There's a blend of politics, mythology, and magic, and there is a cast of emotionally damaged but overall still lovable characters. There are strange ecosystems, ancient gods, and overall this world feels very magical and mystical. There are definitely tropes and things in these books that have been done before, but the way that Jen Williams puts them all together created a world that, for me anyway, was very unique and like nothing I've ever read before. The mythological creatures in these books are known as Titans, and the magic system is quite soft. It is more so tied to myths and nature rather than a very hard magic system with lots of rules and restrictions and where you know exactly how it works. Magic is just a very real part of this world. There are warring empires and queens, and there's this lethal threat that has been sleeping beneath the earth for 2,000 years and now threatens to rise up. Everyone gets swept up in it and has to fight for survival. And while this is definitely mostly a fantasy book, there are also some touches of horror. As I said, there is some body horror every now and then. There are some creepy things going on with insects that actually make me itch just thinking about it. So there is that. And also the griffins do like to eat raw meat, and it gets a little bloody every once in a while, which is like, okay. I personally could very much handle it, but there is some horror every now and then in these books too. So let's talk about the world first. The map of this world is very clearly reminiscent of Europe and Britain. And then Britain appears in these books, like the thing that looks like Britain, as Brittleton. And then the part of the map that looks more like Europe is in this world called the Starlight Empire. And from what I understand, some of the mythology here is also based on or inspired by British and Celtic folklore. And there are clear similarities. For example, the capital of Brittleton is called Londis. So I think Jen Williams took a bunch of these things and created something really new and mystical. Let's also talk about the characters, because the Talon Duology is a multiple POV story, which means that there are multiple points of view that you skip in between. You get to experience the story from different characters and live inside different people's heads. The first character is called Ines, and when she was a baby, she was found by two griffins who decided to bring her home to their own nest and raise her alongside their own cub, T-Rook. This is very unusual because griffins usually eat humans in this world. They consider humans to be prey animals. They're very territorial, but something in their intuition says that this particular human baby needs to be brought home with them. And at the start of the story, Ines is now 16. She has been raised in the griffin world. Even though she is human, she cannot fly, but she does act more so like a griffin because that is the world that she knows. And because Ines is human, she has never been fully accepted by the other griffins. She is mostly just tolerated there. And then something happens where she and her sister T-Rook get exiled from Griffin country. And the second character that you read from is called Levin. Levin is a retired imperial soldier, otherwise known as a herald, and these are basically magically enhanced super soldiers that bring the Empire's blessing to unblessed countries. Her mind and her memories were wiped when she became this super soldier for the Empire, so she has no recollection of her life before, and now that her 8 service years are over as a herald, she seeks to learn more about her past. And she gets these like fragmented visions of some kind of like mystical island and then travels to Brittleton to find out more. Because she doesn't really know who she is, where she came from, she only knows what the Empire told her. You can definitely see in the beginning of the book her saying these things like, we're bringing the blessings of the Empire, and of course for every other country in the world she is basically just seen as the worst like soldier of death. Another character is called Cillian or Killian, I'm not sure, I'm just gonna say Cillian, who is a very honest and slightly antisocial forest ranger, otherwise known as a Druin. Druins have magic of their own, and his job is to protect the paths of the wild wood and to help guide people through it. And these paths are not what you would think about when you think about like a path in the woods. He gets tasked early on in the first book to escort a certain someone through the wild wood, which is not a task that he is very excited about. He basically just wants to be by himself in the wood. And lastly, there is Kaito, who is an Imperial spy, otherwise known as an envoy, and his job is to learn valuable information for the Empress and also take out certain individuals when they are considered a threat to the Empire. As I'm sure you can imagine, he is a very morally gray character, and early on in the first book he gets tasked to escort a very ruthless alchemist of the Empire to find more Titan bones, because the kind of magic that they do in creating the heralds has to do with the bones of dead Titans. Sometimes the books will give you a point of view of another character outside of these 4, but typically it is these 4 characters. I generally enjoy multiple POV stories when they are done right, and in this case it really was. The pacing was, in my experience, done very well. You don't spend that much time with the same character that you kind of forget what the others are up to, but it also doesn't skip around so much that it gets a little bit annoying, or I feel like this was done in a very good way, and it kept me wanting to read more. And it's also nice when you can experience the same world through different characters who have a very different background. So I really enjoyed that. Let's also talk about some of the major themes in this book, and the first one is identity, belonging, and found family. I'm always a fan of the found family trope. I typically really enjoy that, and there's a lot of that stuff in these books too. There's a strong emphasis on sisterhood, and also just the fact that the strongest bonds that we form with others aren't necessarily the ones that we are born into, but the ones that we create along the way. There's also a theme of fate and the bonds that we create with people or creatures that we come across in our lives because of fate. Another one is memory and how that can shape our belief about the world and the role that we play within that, and the burden of the past in general. This world is built on the remains of dead civilizations and forgotten Titan bones, and there are definitely reasons for why things are happening in this world that have to do with the past. There's this question of, can we ever break free from that, or are we just doomed to keep repeating history? And basically every character in these books is burdened by something from the past, whether that is family trauma or ancient wars or having to come to terms with the things that you did when you were younger. And there's also this idea of transformation, and you see this in every character's character arc, which is very believable, but I'll tell you more about that later. But also like literal transformation, like bodies transforming or merging with magic in some way. Yeah, that's all I want to say here. I also enjoyed the prose. It is very readable, very efficient. It's not super lyrical, but it just carries you along very nicely. One of the things that I especially loved about this book are the descriptions of the places that you get to visit. It is so vivid and it is so atmospheric. The landscapes are sometimes beautiful, sometimes eerie. There is just such a sense of like visual imagery that I just love about Jen Williams' writing. The cities that you visit along the way all have their own distinct look and feel. You can almost smell what it smells like there, and I think that that's one of the things that makes these books shine, at least for me. And I also like how Jen Williams wrote the internal voice of each of the characters. You can really tell that some are much more cynical, some are much more insecure. Like, you can really get a sense of what the person is like from the way that they are thinking about things and the word choice. Of course, no book is perfect. I did find the writing especially to be a little bit chewy in the beginning. There is a bit of info dumping about the world going on where you really have to pay attention if you want to follow along. Like, okay, who is this? Like, what's that called? Like, what's the griffin? The empire? What's that? Like, you're a little bit like, you need to kind of focus in the beginning of the first book. But I'll tell you more about the book's weaknesses later. For now, let's talk about some more of their strengths. I really enjoyed those 4 main characters. I felt like they were very fleshed out and believable. Not all of them were as likable as some of the other ones, but I still felt like I could really understand where everyone came from, and they also all had a well fleshed out character arc. There is learning and growing from how things were before, and it all just kind of went in a way where it felt very satisfactory to me. Sometimes when you have a multiple POV story, I will enjoy reading from some characters more so than some of the other ones, and then whenever we skip to the other ones, I'm like, yeah, I kind of wish that we could have stuck with, you know, the ones that I like more. But in this case, I actually liked all of the perspectives equally, so that was very well done. The different characters all had good chemistry with each other, whether they were friends or family or lovers, it all just kind of worked. I loved their conversations, I loved their banter, I loved their interactions, I loved their loyalty. And while these books definitely are plot-driven first and foremost, I would say that they're also definitely very character-driven. If you're someone who, like me, likes to read about characters and their growth and how they experience things, then I think that you will really like these books. Another strength is the world building and the lore. There is so much lore and the world feels so incredibly real. You really get transported into this whole different place full of mystical, magical things. And the world has some super weird stuff going on in it. But when you're reading it, it just makes sense. Like, it makes sense that these things would happen in the world that we are spending time in. The Griffin culture in particularly was super fun and interesting. I loved, you know, reading about their land and how they do things and the rules and the laws that they have. They also have like a little bit of like a cult of griffins that deals with griffins that are about to die, and just their whole society was so fascinating and fun to read. And another thing I really enjoyed were the stakes and the scope. It is very high stakes, but the scope still feels like you can understand the consequences of things. Sometimes what I don't really like is if fantasy gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you end up with some kind of like deity in outer space or something, where it's like it gets really more so abstract. These books stay grounded in the scope that you're familiar with, but the stakes feel incredibly high, so it is very fun to read. Let's also talk about some of these books' weaknesses, and the first one, in my opinion, was, as I mentioned before, the first book was a little bit hard for me to get into. And I only felt fully invested in the story when I was about like a third or maybe half of the way into the first book. Before that, I was interested and I was having fun, but it wasn't necessarily a very casual read for me. Maybe that is just me, but I found that I had to really pay attention to what was happening. As I said, there is some info dumping. There's a lot of information about the world, the mythological creatures, the history, the characters. There's just a lot in the first book. So if that is you also, then I would recommend to just keep reading, because it gets more and more of a relaxing, casual read from like the second half of the first book all the way up to the end. Another thing is that I found the pacing to be a little bit unpredictable at times. Sometimes it went by super fast and I really wanted to pay more attention to certain things as they were happening. Other times it was a little bit slow and I felt like, okay, let's pick things up again. So the pacing was a little bit unpredictable. Overall, I found the pacing to be very good, but at times it was a little bit strange. These books are not ginormous, but they are still 2 fantasy books, so it is a lot of reading, and then I always kind of want to know before I get into it, is the ending worth it to really spend a lot of time reading these 2 books? And if you ask me, yes, the ending is worth it. I thought that Jen Williams wrapped everything up in a quite satisfying way, and it was a lot of fun to read all the way up until the end. There was some things that maybe happened that were a little bit like convenient to like make sure things happened the way that they did, but I didn't find that to be annoying or anything like that, and I actually really liked how everything came together. Lastly, let's talk about some content warnings. While these books were not necessarily that violent in my opinion, compared to some of the other fantasy books that I've read, there was definitely some violence here. It is a war. There are lots of people fighting, dying. There is violence every once in a while. All I can say is I personally found it very readable still. It didn't bother me when I was reading, even though I'm also a highly sensitive person. So yeah, make your own decision whether or not that is something that you can deal with. It is just some like graphic fantasy violence. As I said before, there is some gore, some body horror, some bodies morphing, changing in freaky ways. There's some blood here and there. As I said with the griffins, it got to a point where I was like getting a little bit nauseous from all the raw meat. But nothing too extreme in my personal opinion, but it is definitely present sometimes. And there is also some sexual content, nothing too explicit, but enough for this to be, yeah, an adult fantasy book. Of course, do your own research, look up content warnings in advance if that is something that you want. All in all, I can definitely recommend these two books. I do think that they are suitable for fantasy beginners, if that is you. And they are also, as I said, not too long. When it comes to fantasy series, they can be a little bit daunting sometimes if they have like 10 different parts or the books are this big. I feel like this duology would be a very good place to start if you're not used to reading as much fantasy, but there's also a lot going on that you will enjoy if you are a fantasy reader. I am definitely interested in reading more from Jen Williams, and I think that is something that I'm going to do. I would love to know from you, have you read anything from her? Have you read maybe the Talonsister or the Talon Duology? In the comments, and also if fantasy is something that you enjoy in general. So just for me to like get a sense of what the people are into here. For now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day, and I hope that you are reading a fun book, and if not, pick up a fun book. Okay, bye-bye. Talking about these books makes me want to read fantasy again, and I don't think that I have a new fantasy series on my e-reader yet, but I do have some ideas, so I'm excited.